This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland front of the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
PHLY Sports Ohio without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. Training camp is just around the corner for the Cleveland Cavaliers. That means preseason is just around the corner. That means we're finally going to have some games to talk about. I could not be more excited to get the season underway and see what's in store for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I'm also excited to talk to my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good, pal. Doing good. I more than officially have the itch. Like, I think I crossed that threshold, and I'm now like getting like annoyed that there's not basketball.
You're so close to pretending you're watching the Cavs.
You're close, baby. I'm almost there.
Well, speaking of so close, we have our team previews to wrap up this week, and I could not be more excited to be joined by a former guest of the pod, making, I believe, his second appearance, though that means he's officially a friend of the podcast. From PHLY Sports, that's Philly without vowels, Kyle Neubeck. Kyle, how you doing, buddy?
Well, Y is sometimes a vowel. If we're, I don't know if that's true in Canada as well, Justin.
It is. You know, it's... You guys do good
I'm doing well, though. I'm doing well.
You just cooked the man immediately.
Just like you two, I'm ready for the season to start because I'm sick of the hoping fors or what it might be, and it's like let's see some actual basketball. I'm excited to get rolling.
Well, the funny thing is, the Sixers. You talk about being sick of kind of hoping fors and just like everything that's kind of gone into, the past however many seasons for the Philadelphia 76ers. And it's funny because, they've been so good for so long. This is a team that I kind of expected, the Cavs making a couple postseasons in a row. I've expected to hate you guys at some point by now. Like, I thought we would have had a playoff series. I thought, that we would be starting a rivalry, but so many weird things have happened to the Sixers. The various injuries, obviously a lot to Joel Embiid. Are you sick of context? Because I know I find myself getting sick of like providing context when talking about seasons. I'm like, well, Darius had the hand injury and Donovan had the knee that was bothering him. You got to feel the same way when it comes to the Sixers, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially with, Joel is the guy and has been the guy for his entire tenure in Philadelphia. And to go through this song and dance for the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, where he went from very good all-star type of guy to, this guy's in like the inner circle of the league. And once you reach there, you guys know it as well as I do, certainly having watched LeBron and like the pressure that is always there with him. When you're in that inner circle, either you succeed or every offseason, every down period becomes just this loud, never-ending conversation of like, this guy's never going to get it done, or this guy's a bozo, this guy's like whatever you want to say about him. And I do think, to lend some credence to that idea, after this offseason, given the talent they've added, not just in Paul George, but supporting cast, filling out the depth with pretty reliable veteran guys, it is approaching put up or shut up type time for Joel Embiid and the rest of this team, or this organization, I should say. And that makes it exciting for me. I think Philadelphia feels excited but nervous. It's like that constant, is the rug going to get pulled out from under us? Paul George is a very good player, but maybe he gets hurt. Joel Embiid is great, but maybe he gets hurt. And yes, it gets exhausting, but it makes it easy for content creators, reporters like me, like you guys, whenever it is interesting, even if it's bad interesting, we would say.
It's an interesting kind of conundrum that I think our two fan bases are kind of dealing with, because you kind of mentioned a lot of the line of, they're never going to do it. And the unfortunate answer is probably not. That's generally the truth for sports every year. Like, they're probably not going to do it. Most of the time, you don't win the championship, and being in that kind of liminal space of really good, but not like unimpeachably great, where it's like, even if they don't get it this year, they're definitely going to get it next year. Like, I don't really think either of our teams have that level of confidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get to a point where the Sixers have been close, but not that close for so long, that there is just this general sense of skepticism from the whole city, the whole fan base, where they say, look, we love Joel. They love their head over heels for Tyrese Maxey. Like, I do think that he is probably the reason, if there's hope that they might win or contend, it's him kind of making another level up, another step forward to maybe get to that all NBA type level where he was, just a little bit below that last year. That is viewed as maybe that's the big point of hope for the whole organization. But yeah, I mean, look, if Donovan Mitchell plays as the best player in the series for 4 straight series, it's not impossible for the Cavs to win a title, right? But it's a lot to ask him. And, a lot of it depends on the natural growth from guys like Mobley. And so, yeah, I think there's not too much separation between teams like the Sixers and Cavs, right? Where they're not in the Boston tier. Certainly, I think the Sixers probably believe they're closer to that type of level than wherever they would view the Cavs. But in terms of the results in the playoffs, it kind of is what it is, right? You haven't been able to break through the second round, and at a certain point, you either got to do it or you got to start looking toward, what's next and what's the next iteration of this team.
Yeah, and I think for teams that are kind of within that second tier in the Eastern Conference, there's probably like a level of confidence that we're good enough that if Boston does what they've done so many times and kind of beats themselves, we can take advantage of that, right? Like, if they crack the door open, we're good enough that our reflexes are good enough that we can stick our foot in the doorway and kind of force our way in. And I mean, I can only imagine, the pressure and the noise. Like, Philadelphia, as much as I joked at the start that I'm dying to hate you guys in a playoff series, like, that's a great sports town, right? Like, that's a very passionate fan base. We get the same thing here in Cleveland, obviously. There's a level of impatience with kind of a very normal progression of, they were a play-in team, then they were a first-round team, then they were a second-round team. Like, that progress, it has been viewed as too slow at times, whereas Philadelphia is kind of, they've had this MVP caliber guy in Joel Embiid, and they haven't been able to get beyond the second round. So, reflecting back at kind of how these teams squared up last season, I joked at the start, are you tired of context? Here's a whole bunch of context when we look at how last year went. These teams went 2-2 in the season series. The type of series that no home fans love to see, where the road team won every single game. The Cavs won the only game with Joel Embiid. So, start your small sample size narratives of the Sixers are actually better without Embiid. They won that game in Philadelphia, part of the...
Here we go.
Yeah, no, I am, of course, not arguing that. But they won that game in Philadelphia in overtime without Donovan Mitchell. Then the Sixers won both games in Cleveland. Tyrese Maxey, awesome in those games. Then the Cavs won in Philadelphia towards the end of the season without Embiid. But you mentioned at the start, the growth of Tyrese Maxey, I think, is one of the biggest factors for Philadelphia. You mentioned how, and theoretically, if Donovan Mitchell was the best player in 4 straight series, Cavs could contend for a title. Usually when it comes to a player the caliber of Embiid, he's got to be the best player, right? But I think Tyrese Maxey is starting to get to that level where, hey, if Embiid has a little bit of an off series and we have Paul George next to him, Maxey might be able to, steal that in the way that, Jaylen Brown was able to do that for Jason Tatum, who wasn't playing at his top level for the Eastern Conference Finals and Finals.
Yeah, and I think if you just look historically at teams that have, high-level big man, high-level guard, in a lot of cases, I mean, the most obvious example to people probably around our age is, when Kobe and Shaq were the tandem at the start of the turn of the century. Man, that makes me feel really old to say turn of the century, and it's 24 years ago or whatever. Yeah, 24 years ago. Shaq would dominate touches, time, scoring for a lot of the first halves, third quarter as well. And then as he would wear down, because when you're 300 pounds running up and down the floor all night, as he would wear down, that would be a natural progression for okay, now it's Kobe's time. Now Kobe, he's insane conditioning and he's a great shot maker, all that type of stuff. Now he takes over. And I think the Sixers kind of figured that out a little bit last year, where Joel has so much trust in Tyrese as just a teammate, let alone, off the floor as a friend, partner, whatever you want to say, that when they get on the floor together, if Tyrese is cooking, Joel will cede the floor to him, and he'll say, they're with Game 5 in New York in the playoffs last year. Season looks like it's over. Joel is kind of sputtering through. He's dealing with a face problem. He's got a knee issue. And Tyrese has it going, and it's just here you go, man. I'll run dribble handoffs for you. I'll set a bunch of screens for you. And he goes out and scores, 40 plus, whatever it was. Hits a big shot.
46 burger. I looked up I thought he had gotten 50, so I had to look it up.
I knew he was close. I didn't know the exact number. But so I think seeing is believing to these high-level NBA players, right? And so for Joel to see Tyrese kind of constantly raise his game in big moments and honestly also grow as a vocal guy. There were points in that series where he used to be very quiet because he's a young guy trying to find his place in the league. And now Tyrese is asserting himself in huddles. Hey, they get down 10 points in a playoff game. He's chirping at guys. He's barking at guys, sort of commanding the huddle. And so that's I don't know how to quantify that in terms of how that will impact the team. But I think watching him start to seize ownership of the team in that way obviously bodes well, because he's got the talent. His work ethic is notorious around the league. And if you can, push other guys along with you, that's the mark of a truly true star in the league, right? Is not just you succeed, but the way you play and the way you lead kind of brings the rest of your guys along with you.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that Maxey playoff series is kind of the playoff series Justin and I have been waiting for one of our young guys to have. That total and again, not even in a series win. This is a first round loss, but you'd look at it and 30 points, a 7-2 assist to turnover ratio, 9 threes a game, 9 3-point attempts a game, to be very clear. 40, great
if he
efficiency.
Was making 9 threes a game, that would.
I think he probably would have won the series. I won't lie to you. So I think ultimately, yeah, it's the ultimate jumping off point. And I do feel like he's the kind of the number one ceiling raiser. And I did want to ask about the playmaking just a little bit, because that's moving into kind of some of my wider concerns about this Philly team. If I'm a Philly fan, is Paul George is just okay as a play initiator. Embiid, you'd really rather him be a play finisher. He's grown on that end, but that's never going to be the thing he's known for. And then Maxey was very much not known as a playmaker. He was known as a gunner, a get your buckets guy. And he has games in that series where he has 10 assists, 9 assists, 7 assists. How impressed were you by that? And how much does his growth as a lead ball handler and kind of get you into your offense guy assuage wider concerns about playmaking on the roster?
So it's been a big conversation this offseason in Sixer circles that rebounding is one of the primary concern, or maybe it's probably the primary concern of the fan base. Playmaking is where I go, because I think if you just look at the overall passing talent, go past the guys that you mentioned, Carter, and Caleb Martin, not going to play make for others. Kelly Oubre, pretty notoriously,
Definitely
he is
not
a play finisher. We all know that.
He can pass sometimes. I'm an Oubre believer.
He can. He just chooses not to.
Right. And I think Kelly was actually much better than expected last year on basically every front, had a good season. But you go on down the list, and there are, other than Kyle Lowry, who's 38, 39, he's late 30s and presumably not playing a huge role on this team, there aren't plus playmakers on the roster. Now, Tyrese, I know, is working on it this summer, has said that's one of his focuses, is continuing to evolve there. Last year, he really worked on that pick and roll passing to Joel specifically, hitting those pocket passes to the elbow so he can hit those mid-range jumpers, things like that. Where he needs to get to the next step is, making the skip pass to the opposite corner, making those type of reads consistently. And I think like a lot of Sixers fans were very excited about his assist to turnover ratio was generally great most of the season. And you guys know sometimes that can be a bad thing, right? If you're ultra low turnover, you don't want to turn the ball over, but it can be an indicator of like you're making advanced and aggressive passes that are unlocking the defense a little bit and making them scramble. So I think trying to find that line between, you don't want to turn the ball over, but you want to make sure that you put teams in rotation to make them feel uncomfortable rather than making the smart, easy pass every time. That's, I think, the next level for him. And that, frankly, is one of the hardest jumps to make as a lead guard, in my estimation. It's one of those things that most times you either have it or you don't. But Tyrese works so hard that I'm going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. I'll say that.
Well, I mean, it's hard not to give him some benefit of the doubt when you look at how big of a step forward he took last year. Like, I think from our perspective, that was kind of the step forward that we were hoping to see Darius take. And obviously, his season went sideways with injuries and whatnot. But I think when you look at kind of the Cavs and Sixers and how they match up, if there was a playoff series, Darius, at least playing Maxey to a draw would need to be really important because Joel Embiid's going to be the best player in that series. And, they have played, when they play against each other, I know they have a relationship off the court, and there was the fun mic'd up with them last season. But they play well against each other. And last year, that was actually kind of one of the only teams that Darius kind of consistently played well against. You kind of look at the numbers, Maxey against the Cavs, actually probably his least efficient team that he played last year. 23 points per game, 7.8 assists, 37% from the field and 26% from three. Darius, 22 points, 9.8 assists, and 47-33 shooting. But to me, though, tracking both of those guys and seeing kind of how they progress is going to be really, really important because Darius is going to need to get back to where he was at least in that 22-23 season, the first year with Mitchell. And then for Maxey, like you said, I think you identifying playmaking is one of the more important things because I think Joel's a great playmaker for his position. I think Paul George is capable of making some really smart reads and is going to be able to kind of attack a destabilized defense. But outside of that, like you said, there's not a lot of guys that can do it. You talked about feeling old earlier. We're coming up on 8 years of this podcast, and it's been one of our foundation principles that we do not respect Kyle Lowry on this here podcast. So we are certainly not going to start today. No, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, even in Lowry's case, he's in a bit of a backcourt battle with their rookie they just drafted, Jared McCain out of Duke. Is there's some overlap there in skill set where they're more of the not like a true initiator. Like Jared McCain's going to bring value through his shooting and relocating and things like that. And then there's Reggie Jackson, who part of the reason I think he's here is he's friends with Paul George, right? Like they have this longstanding relationship. So I've been talking about this on our show quite a bit. It's like there's a lot of guys in similar spots in the rotation where we don't know who's going to emerge as like this guy's going to win and own this job. And then there's all these competing personal dynamics. Like Kyle Lowry's got the long history with Nick Nurse. Reggie Jackson has built-in chemistry with Andre Drummond, their backup center, also has the tie-in with Paul George. And it's just like, I would never want to be an NBA coach for this reason because it goes so far beyond just like, well, this guy does this and he's the best guy for the job. And that part's fascinating, though, is kind of mingling.
You wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Yeah, I mean, the paycheck I would certainly take. But,
I believe it's Don Draper that once famously said, "That's what the money's for."
Correct.
Going into kind of, those dynamics, obviously, Maxey was fantastic last year. That wasn't a situation where, hey, he's just putting up numbers when Embiid was out. Like points per game, were pretty similar with Embiid in and out of the lineup. The only difference was when Embiid played, Maxey's assists went up by over a full assist, and the efficiency went up, both from the field and from three. Is there any concern adding Paul George as kind of like a high usage player might disrupt some of that chemistry or flow. Like, we've seen it before, obviously in Cleveland, even where, you can have three great players. Like, you have LeBron, you have Kyrie, you have Love. They all fit theoretically, but there's always a feeling out process, right? Like it takes time to develop chemistry. Someone's going to need to take a back seat at times and figuring out when to pick their spots. That takes time. Is there some concern about kind of integrating all three of those pieces in, or especially if, guys miss time and you don't have as much regular season runway to figure it out?
Yeah, so I would say in the short term, yes, because as you guys know, new season, new huge piece, that's just, there's always going to be some growing pains. I think the beauty of getting Paul George specifically is that he should be closer to a hand in glove fit, right? Where he's very comfortable being a high volume catch and shoot guy, got someone who will attack closeouts if, they're overzealous trying to stop the 3-point shot. I think the fact that they have a true third star now, the Sixers will probably be a little more aggressive, getting Joel rest, whether that's, within games, cutting back his minutes a little bit, or frankly, just giving him nights off entirely, like fewer back-to-backs, fewer 3 games and 4 nights. And so, if Paul is concerned about being able to be like a lead guy, so to speak, I think there will be plenty of opportunities for that throughout the year. But I think, end of the day, I think all these guys, whether it's Tyrese, Paul, or Joel, have their different reasons for wanting to sacrifice a little bit, wanting to kind of give to each other to get to that next goal, right? Like Joel we already went over kind of his trials and tribulations with injuries and trying to win. Paul is now in his mid-30s and has never really gotten that close to a title, right? He's gone to conference finals, but has not gotten over the hump. And then Tyrese is, he's still ascending, but I do think, personality wise and at his core, he's someone who wants to win. Like, I think the best example of that has just been watching him change from year to year, right? Like, he comes in as a rookie. He's a sometimes sixth man, sometimes not playing, and would come in and do whatever the team needed. James Harden, or actually before James Harden gets here, Ben Simmons holds out and Tyrese has to start and play heavy minutes and figure that role out. James Harden comes. Okay, now he's the lead guard. He's the one running the offense. Tyrese slides into, more of a pure shooting guard role and excels at that. James Harden holds out last summer, and Tyrese then goes back into, you're the lead guard, you're Joel's main partner. And as you guys saw, and as we said on this show, he's now like a 26 point per game guy. Assists go up, efficiency's good. And so I think he will do whatever is required to win. And I think the other two guys have already said as much. And Joel, now having gone through the Team USA experience, helps too, right? Where you see, I'm not going to be the featured guy the majority of nights on this team, but that's what it took to come together and, ultimately win a gold medal. I think that was a really important experience for him and this team.
Yeah. A question I just generally have about your team is, because, I'm looking through Justin's notes, which were always excellent. And, subtractions: Tobias Harris, Paul Reed, Nick Batum, Covington, Melton, Bamba, Campaign. And there's a lot of dirty work dudes on that list, or like in between kind of game things. Like, I wouldn't necessarily consider Batum like a dirty work player, but he's such a great connector and doesn't make mistakes, can take on hard matchups. And you look at the this kind of current roster, and Caleb Martin, definitely a dirty work guy. Andre Drummond, sometimes a dirty work guy.
If it's rebounding, he's
I love the big penguin. Don't you dare slander him.
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. How big of a concern of yours is that, they just are going to have no one diving for loose balls, or not enough fighting through the picks, or, wait, why is Paul not guarding the best player on the other team tonight? We kind of need him to.
Listen, if you talk to Clippers fans, that should be Philadelphia concern number one going into this season. But we'll have to wait and see on that. I agree with you. It's certainly something that I think it's dirty work. It's rebounding. It's kind of everything that you would put into a hustle stats category, however that would look. You have to at least raise one eyebrow. I do think historically this hasn't been him, but Kelly Oubre really embraced that type of role last year. There were nights where he's defending the other team's number one option. Like we saw some in the playoffs, didn't always succeed, quite frankly, but was picking up Jalen Brunson full court and is one of their options against him. And then he's making some weak side blocks, and I also think he's got the demeanor to be that type of guy, right? Like he's just kind of a aggressive person when he's on the floor.
I would describe him as a tenacious defender. Like he's trying to make plays.
Yes. Now, sometimes overzealous, but certainly you're going to get the tenaciousness. And so that I think will help. But yeah, I mean, once you get to like Eric Gordon is not going to be one of those types of guys. And I do think Eric Gordon is going to play a decent bit for this team. You're going to be relying on some of these more unknown guys to be those energy, grit, the hustle type players. So like Ricky Council, the fourth, was a rookie last year, became a bit of a fan favorite, where that was kind of his whole thing. He'd come into a game and it was like he was shot out of a cannon. I know, some of your viewers and listeners would know Yabusele from the Olympics for Team France at a breakout Olympics. He's played well overseas, and a lot of people here are looking to him as a potential, like, we don't know if he's even going to stick in the NBA. He's been overseas for a while after flaming out with the Celtics, but you're looking at that type of guy to potentially fill that role. And so that kind of says it all, right? Like one of their most unknown quantities is going to have to be one of those rebounders, connector type players. Batum, I think, was probably the biggest loss they had of the offseason, because they did think there was a strong possibility he was coming back. And I think, going from him to some of these other guys who were good but can't do as many things as well as Batum did last year.
Yeah, and I'm a big B-Ball Paul fan as well. Losing him hurt.
As are we all.
I find it interesting that you mentioned Yabu, because I was going to ask, between him and KJ Martin, who do you think is more likely to kind of have a role? Because I've been someone that's been a believer in the upside of KJ Martin, but it just hasn't seemed to click. If you had to guess someone kind of playing that undersized backup power forward role, who would you think is the more likely option to pan out there?
I think it's probably Yabusele, and some of that is because prior to and even during the Olympics, the word out there on him was, like he's got a good deal on a really good European team. I don't think he's leaving Europe unless he can come somewhere where he's got a real chance to play. And so, I think there were probably some conversations there. Like,
is that a politics answer, or who you think is the better player?
No, well, I mean, it's ultimately hard to know, right? Like I can tell you what I saw of Yabusele in the Olympics and the tape I've watched at Madrid and whatnot, but like you guys know, once you're on an NBA floor with NBA guys, it's a totally different conversation. So based on current run of form, I think it'll probably be Yabusele. Like I think he's got the momentum coming into camp. I've seen some footage of him in some recent workouts. Looks really good at their practice facility. But look, both of those guys need to shoot, right? Like, and that's one of the central conceits of being a role player on the Sixers, is that you can do a bunch of things, but if you're not spacing the floor, you basically can't play next to Joel Embiid, or it's unlikely you can succeed next to Joel at a level that will get you regular minutes. So if one of them comes out in training camp and is shooting the lights out, I think that's the guy who will get that job.
Yeah, well, once again, another parallel between the Cavs and Sixers has developed when it comes to the importance of spacing with role players. But, the benefit for the Sixers is, even if there are some question marks there, when you have a strong foundation, you have that big three of Maxey and Embiid, as Carter shakes his head, it's going to put those guys in a position to succeed. Similar to what Zoom does with us, because only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion.
God bless you, lad.
You just had to shake your head and make me laugh before I did the segue. I hate you. Let's dive into it. So when you discuss, you've already mentioned the need for playmaking when it comes to the Sixers. You've mentioned them kind of being undersized. at least at some positions. What would you view as kind of the biggest need with them going into next year?
It's really tough, right? Because they changed so much of the roster that it's like, so I will probably cop out and just say, talk to me in January, and friend of the pod will come back and we can talk about the trade deadline and whatnot.
I'm scheduling you in right as we speak. I'm booking you.
But I would say if you're trying to, Brett Brown used to call these pre-mortems, right? Like, how are you, if you're going to die, how is that going to happen? Like, you're just kind of guessing at it. One, it's somewhere in the front court, like a front court guy who's got the size to rebound, but also the requisite floor spacing ability that we're talking about. And I do think they probably need one more guy who's like a real creation threat, but can also someone who can take you off the dribble, but is comfortable in like an off-ball spot up shooting type role. You guys know there are not a ton of those guys, right? Like that can be mutually exclusive a lot, which is why we talk a lot about somebody like a Bogdan Bogdanovic in Atlanta. Like, that's kind of the mold for the player that I feel like every playoff team or like would-be contender could
he's come up
We've
for us.
pined.
He's come up for
We've
us for
pined.
sure.
Right. Like, everybody who follows a team that has any type of chance at a title is like, well, boy, if we could just have Bogdanovic, what a piece that would be. And so I always come back to a player like that, right, where Maxey might not have it on a specific night, right? And if you turn it over to Lowry, if you turn it over to Reggie Jackson or Jared McCain, one of these backup point guard types, those guys aren't dynamic enough to swing a game at this point. Maybe McCain can be at some point, but they're more of that, just like, it's like our 3 yards in a cloud of dust running back in football, right? You're trying to move the chains along ever so slowly. And so some dynamism in the backcourt or on the perimeter is the last thing. But look, I think if you're to be honest, they just got Paul George and some, very good role players like Caleb Martin this offseason. They have enough right now that they should be able to, even without big additions, make a real impact and go on a real run this year.
Yeah, I think when it comes to modern team building, like, you just kind of have to accept the flaws. Sorry, Carter, I cut you off.
I was just gonna ask, because looking at this team's construction, is it a little odd to you that they went like, obviously Paul George is the big splash, but then probably the second biggest, like they went aggressively towards Andre Drummond with they didn't throw him like $20 million a year, but they threw him a little chunk of change. And do you agree with that kind of investment of resources, just knowing that Joel's going to need to sit and you don't want to fall apart? Or would you have rather them just chased more small forward, power forward types and tried to kind of bulk up elsewhere, knowing that, if Embiid's down, they're done anyway?
So I think this is one of those where the results might have overridden the process behind it, because if you would have told me that was basically their first agreed to move, right? I believe it was like 10 million over 2 years for Andre. And look, I think for what they need Andre for, he's perfect for that role. He can be an innings eater type player, just play 30 minutes on a Joel off night, but has gotten a lot better and has really embraced that role of being like, I'm going to play 15 minutes and you are going to get a good 15 minutes. Like, I think last year was his best per minute season since, going back to when he was a big money player in Detroit. So I think he will make an impact. But if they had not been able to get Caleb Martin, I would probably feel differently about using some of your cap space, eating into that cap space to sign Andre. So it's always tough to find that balance where Joel will probably miss some time. That when Joel goes off the floor, it's almost always a disaster, no matter who they've had on the team and as his backup. I think my hope would be that adding Paul George and getting like a real third guy, and no real disrespect to Tobias Harris, but Paul George is,
he's kind of the Tobias Harris that was promised.
Yeah, he's a bit of an upgrade on Tobias. And so if you just play those minutes without Joel and have both Maxey and Paul George out there, I think, if Drummond ends up being less playable, we'll say, in the playoffs, you can turn to some other stuff and just say, we still have 2 stars and some other guys that we believe in here.
He's an interesting player. I'm still kind of fond of him. I know his tenure in Cleveland didn't go that well, you know, and ended in weird ways, but like, and had, you know, one of the worst clips in the history of pro basketball.
He's got a bunch of I enjoy that Andre just tries some stuff, man.
Yeah,
it's really entertaining.
Truly reckless abandon. But yeah, I actually think it's a cool addition for you guys. And like, one thing that I will also say is, on a team short of playmaking, like, yeah, Andre will make some boneheaded decisions. He's also like a pretty good passer
Yes.
for a big. Like, you know, he did some high post stuff, at least when he was here, that I was like, dang, that, you know, if you just made reads like that even semi consistently, like, it would really change the way you can play. So like, on a team starved for it,
I think that Grizzlies play was him attempting that, and it didn't work as well.
You know, no one's perfect. But you know, I do think, like, for a team that's starved for it, like, he could really be helpful there as well.
Yeah, and I think the hope would be, not only will he do that, but if we're talking about these, you know, rebounding issues, whatever you want to say about Andre, he will get defensive rebounds. And so that, I think some of the justification on using that money on him is they need the Joel backup, but they also, to justify the rest of the roster, they need guys who are like elite rebounders. And I think Andre is one of, you know, let's say 5 to 10 people in the league who are like truly elite defensive rebounder. So I think that's a big part of the calculus there as well.
And he gets offensive rebounds too, right? Like, he's probably like a top 5 to 10 rebounder in general in like NBA history. Like, he's at that kind of level.
And if your Embiid-less offense gets a little chucky, it's nice to have a vacuum to clean up all the messes.
Although, in all fairness, a lot of those offensive rebounds are his own shots.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that.
Hey, listen,
details.
This is the city where Moses Malone won a title, and most of what he did was just pass the ball to himself off the backboard. So we will take rebounds however we can get them around here.
You know, we love Ricky Davis too. We get it. We understand it. Let's focus on the matchup between the Cavs and Sixers. Obviously, like, we haven't really got to see these teams fully healthy. Like, I feel like so many times, you know, last year we only played Embiid once. The years prior, it seems like Jared Allen has missed almost every one of those matchups. It's a really interesting matchup for me. I've always, when I saw Nick Nurse, James Harden, and Joel Embiid on a team together, I was like, this is going to just play into everything that I hate about basketball. But so I'm very happy that at least the Harden part of that equation's gone. When you look at these teams and kind of how they stack up, is there anything about the Cavs in particular that raises questions about the Sixers where you feel they might be vulnerable?
Well, so I think, I mean, it's easy to look at the star players on both teams, right? But I think they don't necessarily have somebody who's a great option against Mitchell, right? Like, they'll probably have to do that by committee, because I think you go into the series, you say, all right, Garland and Maxey, they'll probably guard each other, spend lots of time on each other. They're both going to get theirs. Joel should be the best player in the series. Although I used to say this, and I'll say it to you guys, that I felt like Jared Allen was in a group of players that are some of the best players that just have no chance against Joel. I actually do think he made a bit of progress last year, had some good moments against him in the limited opportunities that we saw. But so you still expect Joel to overcome Jared and Evan Mobley in that matchup.
Jared will, you know, play perfect defense on him, and Embiid just, you know, he does, because he's one of the best offensive players ever. Yeah.
He's so much bigger than him that it's like, you can play as hard as you want and have great discipline. The guy might just go through you. But on the other side of the coin, I think the Sixers' better defenders are in more of the, we're going to defend big wings mold, right? Like 3s and 4s, and maybe not somebody who's, you know, like kind of a classic 2 combo guard in Mitchell, where, you know, last year you would have like a DeAnthony Melton, who I think is a more natural matchup for Mitchell. Now, that's not to say, even if they had a guy who was, this is our Donovan Mitchell type defender, Donovan's still probably going to get his, right? But I do think
very similar to the Jared Allen conversation.
Yeah. But I do think it's a concern if you go into that series that is like, well, we don't really have a off the top of your head, just like this is the guy we're throwing at him. And it's something you probably have to figure out, assuming that everyone's healthy for the regular season series. You got to figure out during the regular season, like, all right, we got to try Kelly some, we got to try Caleb some, and shuffle through some of these guys. I think ultimately it'll be by committee. And I tend to believe, like, if you have to do something by committee, you're kind of screwed to start with, right? Like, if you don't have in your head, like, yeah, that's our guy, you don't have anybody. So that would be my main concern. That's probably true for a lot of the league, but I think if you just look at the only two guards on the roster are like Eric Gordon, who, if he has to defend Donovan Mitchell,
we'll take
love
that.
Eric Gordon to death, but he's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And you just go down the line, there's just really not anybody there that matches up well with him.
I think there's also I'll talk about I'll actually knock out my anxiety about the Sixers first, because it's the easiest one, which is that Joel will put our bigs in the basket and foul them out, which is the worst combination possible, Like, you're not only are you not stopping him, he can also kind of rob you of your identity as a team by getting you in such horrible foul trouble.
Tristan Thompson checking in with 10 minutes to go in the first.
Yeah, it's like you could see that. So like that's my fear right away. I think as a Cavs fan though, like, I think this Sixers team is really good. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are, that are similarly talented that will have a really, really hard time. I do think there are things that play in the Cavs' favor here, I talked about that kind of physicality question, not on accident, because really, if there's one thing that the Cavs offense does not like, because their primary ball handlers are small guards, is they don't want to get beaten up. I mean, their offensive performance has really struggled the last two playoffs because they've been going against Josh Hart and these Jalen Suggs, and then Drew Holiday, like all these just big, strong, tough guards that fight over every single screen and knock you off your dribble every time you try to do anything. Like, I don't know if Philly really has those guys at the point of attack, and they're not switchy either. Like, I don't think, if they're attacking Embiid in the pick and roll, it's going to be a drop. I mean, 99, especially if they're playing, a 6'5", 6'6" Caleb Martin at power forward. Like, you don't want to switch Embiid out and then just have the paint completely unprotected. So I think Garland and Mitchell, like, if there's one defense they need to be able to beat consistently, if this team is going to go anywhere, it's they'd better murder drop coverage. So I feel like it's one of the things that I do think this is a really good matchup if the Cavs were to play. Like, of the top tier East teams, like, I think there are some that I think Philly is better than, but I might pick Philly to play them over the others. I don't know. Justin, am I talking crazy?
No, I think it's interesting, and I think that's one of the areas you mentioned, playmaking for Tyrese Maxey. I think improving on the defensive end is a player that has a lot of strength and has the physical tools. That would be something that I'd keep an eye on, because obviously there's no great catch-all defensive metric, but defensive EPM, he was about 40th percentile last year. He was better the year before, and maybe some of that could be correlated to, hey, he had to take on a bigger offensive burden with Joel Embiid out. Is the infrastructure going to be better if Embiid's healthy for more of the year, and you have Paul George out there? I think there's an opportunity for Tyrese Maxey to kind of take that step forward on the defensive end, and if he does, that's going to help them, obviously. But Carter, you touched on something, and Kyle, I want to ask you this question: why is Caleb Martin the power forward? Paul George is bigger.
I don't know that anybody is necessarily the power forward on this team. That is one of the. It's been a talking point throughout the offseason here in Philadelphia. Like, why aren't they signing power forwards? This is a city that's seen, Charles Barkley and guys like that have a lot of success at the position. I think they just kind of view it as, we have a bunch of wings, and that's how they're playing it. It's more of how the modern NBA works. Somebody will be listed as the power forward on the old lineup sheet and in all the data that we go through. But yeah, I mean, I don't put too much stock into however they're designated, it's going to be. I think the interesting thing with who they have, and assuming they're going to start three wings in Oubre, Martin, and George, is how much their starting lineup actually changes night to night. I feel like I've mentioned them a few times now. I think Eric Gordon is actually kind of a dark horse to start out the gate. Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because those wings, other than Paul George, and other than Paul George is a big qualifier, right? But Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin are just like okay shooters. And so in the regular season, I wouldn't be shocked if they said, look, Eric Gordon will space out to 30 feet. He's comfortable in that, just like, you're going to stand there and bomb threes type of role against most teams that they'll play. So like the not inner circle teams, they don't have to worry too much in the regular season about his defensive issues. Now, I think they'll probably get to the point where that's not really tenable, and I don't expect them to start tons of games, but I do think there will be matchups where they say, let's just look at some different stuff in the event that we do get, the favorite of the pod, Bogdanovich or someone like that. And we have
don't try to will something into existence on our podcast.
Yeah, you got enough additions already. Okay, we ran it back.
That's our territory. Is wishing something and willing something into existence.
Yeah. Come on, man. We
don't want the guy I'm really trying to will into existence, if they don't figure things out in New Orleans, I feel like he's a big part of their future. But if Trey Murphy somehow becomes available, that's the guy that I'm just like, trade everything you have left for that guy. Just a big young wing who gets shots up quickly, and is comfortable in that kind of like fourth, fifth guy type of role. I think New Orleans is probably treating him more as like he's a foundational guy, but
I think so too.
He's so much to sort through down there. It's just it's a weird. They still have CJ, they still have Ingram. It's like Trey Murphy's still probably not going to start, and it's like he wants to get paid. Are you gonna? I don't know. There's a whole lot of stuff going on down there.
I feel like he's in a fascinating spot because he's either going to take like a leap to become like the hypothetical player that a team like Cleveland, Philadelphia, or any team that's trying to contend is going to become, or he's going to have another season like last year where, it's just inconsistent. Like, he's a vertical athlete, but he doesn't move well laterally. The creation's not there. Like, he's almost probably like impossible to trade for because he's either going to play so well that like he'll never be available, or he's going to be stagnant and you're not going to want to pay like the price that it would cost to get him out of New Orleans. But we do plenty of pining for players on this podcast as well. So I won't guilt you for that. And he's on the list. He's certainly on the list.
Listen, everyone's lists are the same. You look at, all right, this team probably is, let's say, not a disaster, but could go down a negative path. He's young. He's pretty good. Yeah. He's a target. That's just like, that's how it goes. Right?
Am I crazy to ask about someone like Kyle Kuzma for your team? I mean, the price point might just be too high, but of like the 3-4 hybrids that actually is like has legitimate power forward size, like he's one of the few ones on really bad teams.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't for the money, I think he's making too much where once not because like I care what Kyle Kuzma makes, but trying to make a cap legal trade using the contracts they have is very difficult. And I do think, though, to your point, Carter, he's a guy that in that situation looks pretty bad a lot of the time, is putting up numbers and it's leading to nowhere. I think if you put him back in an environment where he's, third, fourth option type guy, sort of how he was when he was coming up in LA, I think you'll start to see more of he had some great defensive moments on the Lakers, right? Where he's got the frame, he's got the athleticism. When he's given, all the possessions and all the shots and all the touches, it can go awry. But yeah, that's someone I think in the right context would be good, and it may even be this one if they could figure out a legal trade to make for him.
I have a wild Kuzma stat that I saw NBA University tweet. Do you know Kyle Kuzma was third in the NBA in rim percentage and rim field goal percentage?
That's I knew crazy. It was high. I did not know it was that.
Yeah, it's Gafford, Giannis, Kuzma, AD, and then Mo Wagner. which
Shout
I
out
don't know.
You know, Gafford was there too. Maybe teams just did not take Washington that seriously, and you got a few more kind of rim attacks than you would against other teams. You know, 82 games is a long, long time, man. And sometimes you have an evening in Washington, and you just don't get up for it the same way. But yeah, he would be a really good, interesting fit. This Philly roster is fascinating. You know, we've talked to, you know, the Knicks, we've talked Celtics, we've talked Milwaukee, and like everyone's kind of had like some changes. You know, like the Knicks brought in Bridges, but for the most part they're kind of running it back. Boston's running it back. Cleveland is very much running it back. Philly is just so different than last year, and I think that makes them very, very interesting to talk about. You know, we mentioned things like, oh, maybe the Cavs can take advantage of the point of attack, and like we feel good in certain areas, but we've also seen, like in our own history, like you can talk matchup advantages and stuff like that, but sometimes the best player just wins the playoff series. And I think like that's, if they played the Sixers, that's what it would likely come down to. Like, how do you contain Joel Embiid? Is he just kind of imposing his will and saying, no, we're going to win this series? Like, I think that's what it would come down to. But one exercise that we've done with all of kind of our guests as we preview the Eastern Conference is we need to get your power rankings. We need to get your top 8 for the Eastern Conference and who you feel most confident can make it to the NBA Finals.
Okay, so I mean, the boring answer, the tier 1 team that's by themselves is Boston, right? Like
no surprise everyone said that.
They might be a worse regular season team because of the Porzingis stuff, and also just coming off the long run. They'll probably take their foot off the gas a little bit, but I think they deserve to be taken seriously now as like they're the top of the conference. And
I love that we had to wait for them to win a title to be like, I guess we'll take them seriously.
Well, fine.
There was a little bit of there's a little bit of like, I don't know how much I buy it, especially after they lost to that Miami team in the conference finals the year before. It's like, come on, man. So
I'm still, as a result of that, I'm looking at them like, you know, they can be had. Someone can have them.
We all talk ourselves into things. It's, you know, it's okay. So Boston first. I think next tier, I have the Knicks and the Sixers, and I would put the Knicks ahead of the Sixers. I think they, to your point, because they have fewer things to figure out, right? Like McHale is a very plug and play guy, has experience with a lot of those. It's Villanova North up there in New York, so can I push
back on that one? I actually kind of disagree. Like, I think they actually have quite a bit to figure out. I think like they were a team that like had, you know, and Justin's brought this up a lot. Like, they were playing Josh Hart 45 minutes a game. All of a sudden, if Tibbs wants to have a remotely happy locker room, he's got to play like 9 guys, and like that's going to be a challenge. They lost Hartenstein, and they don't have Robinson for the first several months, which means like Tibbs has to play Randall at center, which like that's a huge learning thing that like he really is neglected to do much. Like, I think they actually have a lot, and I think on the other hand, even though obviously Philly has a lot to figure out, I think there's something about Embiid that kind of grounds you stylistically. Like, I pretty much feel like I know how Philly's going to play next year. You know, like they're just going to play better because like there's a certain kind of limitation on, you know, you're just not going to change your style that much when you have a singular player like Embiid. So like, yeah. I don't know. Like, am I talking crazy here, or do you think there's some validity to the fact that like they have more continuity than maybe it looks like from the outside?
Yeah, and look, I do think, to your point, the Hartenstein loss is a big loss for the Knicks, and now that Mitchell Robinson's going to be out until I think they said it was, you know, late like December, early January at best, that having to start, you know, Jericho Sims or Precious Achiuwa or even like Randall as a 5, that's a real problem to have to deal with for 2 months, 2.5 months, whatever it might end up being. And in a competitive East where seeding might matter a whole heck of a lot in the playoff matchups, that's a real thing to take into consideration. But I fall back on, you know, look, Brunson last year was putting up like Steph Curry numbers at times as a shooter, has become like such a dynamic on-ball shooter and like head of the snake there. I think OG, assuming he's healthy, which he almost never is, is one of the best and most versatile defenders in the league. McHale's a great defender. Tibbs, I just believe in as an elite defensive guy. Whether he can figure out all the hierarchy stuff, like can Randall get enough touches? Can McHale get enough touches? That's a big question. But I think they feel safer to me in some ways than the Sixers do, mostly because we have to think about the Joel injury stuff, the Paul George, frankly, his health and his mid-30s. It's not like he's always been the healthiest guy. But so I'd put the Knicks second, Sixers third, and in kind of a grouping together. And then the next
my theory. Before you continue, you killed my theory, because I every guest that I had on, I said, because the second tier in the East, like for me, it's a 4-team second tier, right? Like you know, the kind of group that you'd assume, because it's all so close and we all know our teams better than most. I said every single person is going to put their team second. You broke the trend. And before I get you to continue, I just want to say I'm so proud of Carter.
What?
I was sitting back in my chair like a proud papa when he was starting to say Nick's skepticism. I finally got him to that point. He was so confident when we had Claudio on, and he's like, no, I think the Knicks are awesome. Now the doubt is starting to creep in, and it's just me. It's me berating him day after day after day. With just
no, you're not even berating me. You're like Grima Wormtongue over my shoulder, just The Knicks, they have too many role players. Everyone's gonna resent the Villanova guys.
So
he's not wrong.
Questions are being asked of the Knicks on this podcast. I will certainly say that. After that, I think there's a group of 4 teams, including the Cavs, that I don't think there's like a ton of separation between. Or I think if I were to say I think this team's going to the finals, I think I need to see something materially change. So like Milwaukee, for his first example I'll give, their defense was just not good enough last year. And I don't think the additions they made in the offseason really fundamentally changed that. You also are relying on aging Dame Lillard. Where is he at on his aging curve? Where is Chris Middleton at? He had a great round 1 series, but most of the year was either not healthy or when he was playing, just not Chris Middleton that we know. So a lot of questions there. The Cavs, I mean, you guys brought up Darius's name several times throughout the pod. I think if Darius is back on kind of the trajectory everyone believed he was on maybe like a year or two ago, then I think that's a material difference between the Cavs team last year and this iteration and the run it back version of the team. But you need to see progress from him. And I frankly would like to see more progress from Evan Mobley as more of a self-creator, a consistent offensive. I was about to make up a word. And the offensive production's got to be more consistent from him.
Can I hear what that word was going to be?
Yeah, you're not saying another word.
I don't know.
What were you going to say?
Words were being mashed together in my head, so I don't even know what the word was. So.
I've made up so many words on this podcast, so that's why I was just a little bit curious.
So I want to see more from Evan Mobley offensively. I think certainly on defense, he's shown a heck of a lot already. The Pacers, even though they had their run last year, the Halliburton thing in the playoffs, I'm just like,
it's weird.
It just doesn't look right to me. Like
it was a little Hawksy. It was a little Hawksy. That's So to clarify, for your rankings, you have Milwaukee above the Cavs, then Cleveland, then Indy.
Yes.
Okay.
And
I am going to quibble about them being in the same tier as Indy, but they're your rankings. You can explore the space as
and
you
Indy
will.
made the conference finals last year.
Well, maybe you'll be upset about the next team I'll throw in the same tier as well. But so the Pacers, it's like they went on the nice run. I like a lot of their guys, but it just feels like a team that doesn't have the guy that if I'm like going into it, if they're playing Cleveland, for example, in a playoff series, it's like Cleveland has Donovan Mitchell. Like, to me, it's almost that simple where you would say, I would bet on them in a series because of that. And then the last team I would put in that tier, so 7th of this list, is Orlando. Now, Orlando is at the bottom of this tier because I think they have the most to prove with they're not a good offensive team in the half court, right? And I don't think KCP helps them in that way. He's not a creator. He's more of just he's a 3-and-D, like a very classic 3-and-D player, and they're still like a piece away. I just think that they are so good defensively and you guys felt it at some of those games in the first round last year were like, oh my God, it's like basically impossible to score against these guys. You get a little bit of a step forward from Paolo, a little bit of a step forward from Franz and these other guys. They're going to be a bear to play against. But again, I don't believe in the offense enough. And then I
trust them more than Indy. I trust them more than Indy personally. Like I would flip those two in my rankings.
I think there's less volatility. It's just a matter of, how much growth is there from the young guys. And then final tier in the like stupid voodoo tier by themselves is Miami, because they shouldn't be good. And I shouldn't even think about them being a finals team. But Pat Riley must have like made a deal with the devil or done something they're always in the mix. They always somehow pull role players out of thin air. So I'll never count them out. They always just kind of exist in this. I have to just throw all my logic and all my basketball experience that I've had out the window and say, the Heat just do Heat things. And so that rounds out the top 8.
There also just isn't another team to put there. Like, who are you going to put Atlanta over them? Like, no. Toronto, Chicago.
It is the definition of an 8-team conference.
Yes. And as you said with Miami, it just comes down to that voodoo. Like, it doesn't make sense. They're going to be scary as long as they're together. And, it doesn't matter how long they play poorly. They can just start playing well at any point and ruin a playoff series for you. So, Kyle, thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. We don't want to take up any more of your time. Before we let you out of here, let the people know what you got going on.
So if you want to check us out, the PHLY Sports on YouTube, we're at allphly.com is where you'll find our written content. I'm one of the hosts of the PHLY Sixers podcast. We do that 5 days a week, 3 p.m. Eastern, all through the offseason. Once the season starts, we do post-game, pre-game, all types of game-centric coverage in addition to the daily shows. So you can check us out all those places, and then find me on Twitter at Kyle Neubeck. That's all I got.
5 days a week, and you still found the time to come on and talk to us idiots. Thank you so much.
Friend of the pod. You guys are my boys. So
there you go. And you're coming on in January. So, we've already figured that out.
Deadline time, baby.
Kyle, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it. Appreciate everyone tuning in live on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.